Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
All right, Susan, thank you for coming in. So this is a sort of sensitive, difficult topic, but seems to me a super important topic to talk about. So why don't you just tell us your story? Tell us why you're here, what this is all about, and maybe you want to throw in some of your background and stuff. And
Sure. Well, I'm here because I've had a very long career in mental health. I didn't know I'm a nurse. I have a master's in nursing. I have a school nursing in particular, and bachelor's in mental health and rehabilitation. But I started. It's funny. My work is really focused on suicide prevention and has been most of my career. I've taught at the University of Medicine and Dentistry 4 years. A lot of my work has been done in the emergency rooms, seeing patients as they come in who would be suicidal. And so I've worked in all kinds of inpatient mental health centers, but I didn't always start there. Actually started as a hospice nurse. And a young nurse, very young. I became a licensed practical nurse before I got my registered nurse at age 18. And so I went and I started working in hospice, really helping people die, and became, really fascinated by how hard it was for them to let go of life, despite all the things that they were enduring, which was incredible pain and suffering. And I would spend an enormous amount of time after my procedures were done with them, helping them let go. And I always tell the story. People ask me, how'd you get into suicide prevention? Well, I started seeing that survival instinct in its finest. And one night, my nursing supervisor came to the door, and she called me to the door, and I'm like 18. I'm like, oh, God, am I in trouble? And she said, have you noticed where all the other nurses are? And I said, no, I don't know where they are, but all my procedures are done, and I'm just sitting here trying to help this person. I was working night shift. It's 3 a.m. She said, yeah, I know. I come by here a lot, and I see you at the bedside every night, but the other nurses are at the station. I think you might have missed your calling. Think about psychiatry, because what you're doing is psychiatry, and we need more of that. So when I did go into psychiatry and started hearing about kids in particular wanting to die by suicide, I knew that went against your natural survival instinct. And I became fascinated with it because I was like, wait a minute, this is a basic drive for humans to stay alive. What happens that children in particular would lose their interest in living? And lose that survival instinct. And I knew it was preventable. And it wasn't just kids. It goes across the age span. You can see it from really now 5 to 10-year-olds all the way up to 95-year-olds, right? So I just became fascinated with that.
5-year-olds?
You heard me.
Oh, my.
5 to 10-year-olds. Yeah, we've had post-pandemic, the emergency room visits for 5 to 10-year-olds increased by 50%. When I first heard that statistic.
From 2020,
yeah,
like post-pandemic.
Yeah, post-pandemic.
And when you say for suicide attempts?
Yeah. And when I first heard that statistic, I was working as vice president of the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County and working in schools, really trying to put in what we call a curriculum, a Lifelines curriculum for suicide prevention. So I said, well, that's wrong. That's got to be wrong. And so I called those schools. I called the emergency rooms and said, tell me what schools are sending kids inappropriately, and I'll go out and try and do some education on that. And this was actually even pre-pandemic.
Wait, sending kids inappropriately, I lost.
From schools. A lot of times kids will say things in schools.
Oh, from schools to the psych ward.
To the emergency room.
Okay.
And if, or even from other settings. And I said, and this was actually pre-pandemic, this phone call. I said, I'm hearing that the ages are going younger and younger. can you tell me if there's a school that needs education or training, let me know who they are, and I'll offer the training to them. And they said, Susan, they're here because they need to be here. And I was floored by that.
The hospital would say
Yeah,
that.
the hospital said they're not being sent inappropriately. They're being sent because they need to be here. And then I started, wow, we've got to do a lot more work.
What's the socioeconomic? Are these rich kids, middle class kids, poor kids, or all of it?
Well, you know,
Back then from that.
well, that was actually after the suicide contagion that happened in Manasquan. After I did 10 years as a teacher here in Manasquan and school nurse, that's when that happened later on. So let me go back a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that, though. You said post 2020,
Yeah.
there's been a 50% rise in 5 to 10-year-old suicide attempts.
Well, kids with ideation, thinking about it, wanting it.
Before we do go back, can you touch on that? Like what the connection is to
You know,
post-pandemic, if anything?
Post-pandemic, I mean, kids went through a lot of trauma during the pandemic, but also so did parents. Parents went through a lot of trauma as well. And so my theory on that is that, you know, kids were hearing those words, not just from their peers, but from their parents. I can't do this anymore. I can't take this anymore. This is too much.
This lockdown, the masks, the not seeing people.
The isolation. It was difficult for children. And they were, you know, and there was a lot of stress in families. And if there's already stress in families, lock them down together, times it by 10, you know. So that's what I think was happening there. But going way back.
All right. Since you brought this up, though, okay, because you brought it up.
I did bring it
and
up.
you're a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in the early days of COVID, it was like, shit, am I going to die? Are we all going to die? Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, I guess I better enjoy life now, you know? And then, you know, it's going to be a dark winter. And like, I mean, it seems now that, you know, in the mandatory vaccines and let's inject babies with vaccines and then the money that the pharmaceutical industry was making from those vaccines. And if we get everyone in a hysteria that you might die, you better take these vaccines, then they'll make more money. And then people would go on podcasts, like doctors would go on podcasts or just post anything on, say, LinkedIn, questioning maybe the vaccine's not good for this age group, or maybe there's an alternative to COVID, other, you know, some alternative things, or maybe the lockdowns aren't a good idea. And then they would get banned and shut down. Do you want to? Can you comment on that at all? Maybe from a medical perspective, because to me, look, I think, and again, Mark and I have talked about this, that I'm trying to let the guests talk and not me, so I'll shut up quickly. I promise. But it just seems to me like post-COVID was great in the sense of we're more virtual. People, I think, have a better appreciation for life and enjoying life for the short time that we're here on this earth. And frankly, it's made business and what we do somewhat more convenient and everything because of the virtual and all that. But it seems that those lockdowns and the crazy masks and all this was something of a mistake. But can you give us your perspective if you care to share it?
Well,
to share it on that.
Okay. Well, there's pros and cons. You know, I mean, I am a trained medical nurse, so I'm going to tell you that I believe in vaccines. But what I think happened, you know, with the lockdown and all of that, I think it really did affect our mental health. And in terms of,
I mean, kids lost 2 years of a normal intended school experience with sports and college and high school and friends. It's terrible.
Even like social interactions. Like I can, because I have relatively young, I guess, family members that were very young when COVID happened. Even like going to the park, it's like oh, don't go near that kid, spray
The
this down.
anxiety, yeah, the anxiety.
I mean, when I go to church now, and I'm go to Catholic church,
Right.
and for those anyone that doesn't go to Catholic church, at some point during church, there's a piece where I forget exactly what it is, and you would always shake hands. And now in church, people are waving. I don't wave. I put my hand out.
I know.
But anyway, go ahead.
I know. But, so going back to all that and talking about all that, I mean, when you think about that, and certainly in my lifetime, we've never seen a worldwide pandemic. And that was real. I mean, there were people dying. I know I've had 5 friends die from COVID.
But wasn't it something like, and this is what I heard, I don't know if it's true, but the federal funding for COVID for hospitals depended on how many deaths they had. And I've heard like, oh, they'd come in with a gunshot wound and check it off as a COVID death. I mean, was that real? I don't know. When you say there was a lot of deaths.
Yeah. When I talked to my nurse colleagues who were in the emergency rooms and in the trauma units during that time, and I've talked to a lot of them, what they say to me, it was really rough on them. They saw an incredible amount of suffering and death. And, people will say, well, they had, secondary,
obesity
complications and all of those other things. And that's true. Most of the people we lost had had another overriding issue, but they probably
comorbidities, they call it.
Comorbidities, but they would not have died if they hadn't contracted COVID. So it's a fine line, but I will tell you that I have done a lot of work with the nurses, and I'm doing a lot of work right now with medical staff. I teach doctors, I teach nurses about suicide, mental health, and they talk about that time in terms of how difficult it was for them to not be allowed to let a family in with their loved ones in those moments, and to be on the phones and all those things, and to be inundated with that over and over and over and for long periods of time. So I don't know exactly about the data of the hospitals, but I do know that when I speak to my colleagues that they were struggling themselves, and that a lot of them left the field after that. A lot of them left the field. We lost a lot, especially people my age that were on the brink of letting go of their careers, retirement. They left. And same thing with teachers. They left because it was exhausting. So, yeah, I think that when we look at the impact, and we could debate lots of those ins and outs, and we'll never know all the truths because there was a lot of misinformation. But what we do know for sure is that every single person in this room suffered. Your children suffered. We all have been struggling since to put life back together again. And like you say, it's still with us. You want to shake a hand and people will give you an elbow and, that kind of thing. So, yes, I think that
but
the mental
lingering
health
question I have did society suffer all that in large part so big pharma could sell more shots? I mean, that is a lingering question I have. I mean, the power of those pharmaceuticals, and it was like free money for them once they got it, because I believe the research was largely funded by it. And then they were getting paid for the shots by the government, billions and billions of dollars. And the question is, that's the big lingering concern question I have. Was it all to sell more shots? But anyway.
And I can't answer that for sure. I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And what I think, what I look at is Big Pharma has made a lot of money, not just on COVID, but on lots of things. And they still continue to do so. There are a lot of injustices in that.
Well, but let's be fair. They also save countless lives. I mean,
Right.
come on, let's not, let's go.
And that's what I feel about the vaccine is that I think that we came out of the pandemic because of the vaccine. Now, I don't know how long we would have stayed in it if that hadn't been developed. And it was developed quickly, which kept a lot of people fearful, which I understand that. So it's a fine line.
I remember I was fighting so hard for like a year to not get sick, doing all the things and the washing and then finally I got sick, and I was laid up in bed for about a day or two. And I was like, well, thank God I finally got it. And what the hell was I fighting that for, all that? And then I think we all got it in our family. And then it was like, okay, I hunkered down in bed, fluids.
Did you get the vaccine?
No comment.
So, Mark, what's your next question?
Yeah. My next question is you're talking about how people are still kind of putting their lives together post-COVID.
No, but anyway, you were Susan. You were kind of telling us your story, and we kind of got off on this vaccine tangent. And you were kind of telling us your story and how you got involved in all this, kind of leading up to.
Yeah.
So go ahead if you want to.
Well, so I always tell the story that after being in mental health for a very long time and teaching at the University of Medicine and Dentistry, traveling the country, speaking on mental health topics, one day after doing the commute up to, Piscataway, I saw, as I did every day, car accident. And I had this thought in my head, how long am I going to make this commute before I'm in a car accident? Well, anyway, fast forward, I walk into Manasquan High School that day, elementary school. And the secretary said to me, I was PTO vice president, and so they knew me. And she said, "Oh, are you here for the school nurse position?" I said, "What school nurse position? Maybe I am." And of course, in my head, I'm thinking, around the corner, I live in Manasquan. My kids are sixth grade, high school. This would be perfect. I'll have more time with them during those tough years of adolescence. Maybe I am. And I interviewed and I got the job. And I thought to myself, I'm a mental health nurse. Hope I can do all the medical things like asthma and diabetes. I brushed up on all of that. But I'm thinking, will I have a place here? And I actually remember speaking to the dean of nursing at Monmouth University because I was going on for my master's, and I told her she said, "Oh, there's a place for you in psychiatry and school nursing."
What year was this?
This was 2000. Let's see,
2008.
Seven. Yeah, 2000. Okay. Going into 2008. Yeah, September. So I started the job, and within 3 months of arriving, we lost a student to a drug overdose.
Is this the grammar school or high school nurse that you're
I
positioned?
floated between the elementary school, so I was like the second nurse. So I would assist the elementary school, then I'd float 2 days a week over to the high school. I was floating back and forth. And we lost our first student to a drug overdose. And that really put a ripple in the community of grief, right?
Isn't a drug overdose, I don't know if the right word is a euphemism, but I always feel like when someone says, "Oh, they OD'd," or "How'd they die?" "Oh, they died from a drug overdose." I mean, I think we need to come up with a better word than drug overdose, because if you're taking illegal drugs, any amount is an overdose. It's kind of like when you say overdose, it's kind of like, "Oh, shoot, they took a little too much." And I think that's not really a great way to say it, because an infinitesimal amount of fentanyl can kill you.
Yeah.
If you take a hit of a weed that's laced with something, one hit, isn't it true that can kill you at some point? So it's not really an overdose. Like any amount of drugs someone takes, I think, is too much. But anyway.
Yeah, and we don't know, what one body can tolerate versus another, and a lot of kids with addiction. Especially in recovery, this child that we lost that I'm talking about was not in recovery, but actually that story was that two boys went out, did the same drugs, alcohol, same together. One woke up, one didn't. One had an upper respiratory infection. That's the one that didn't wake up. So that speaks to, having that comorbidity. And so that's what, so we don't know. Are we working with a respiratory infection that could be the issue that we don't wake up?
Isn't it also with when someone dies of drugs in that regard, some of it can be if they're lying on their back, they can die. But if they're lying in the fetal position, or the recovery position?
On the left side, yeah, the recovery position.
Then they don't choke on their vomit or whatever.
Yeah, you don't want to have aspiration pneumonia or just aspiration period.
Right.
That can create that. So there's just so many factors to it. But that was the first loss, that when I'm going back to that boy that died by that overdose, and the boy that lived, was very traumatized by that.
The survivor's guilt.
Yeah,
my gosh.
And he spoke about that, and told his friends the details of that loss. And that really created a sense of pain in our community. And I think the next loss we had was by train, and that was, in the community as well. And I think that, again, just layered. So we had...
what years are we talking roughly?
Between the years of 2008 and 2012,
Okay.
we actually lost 12 students.
And who's
And
we?
that's in,
The school
we
system.
being the community.
Of Monmouth County, New Jersey?
Monmouth County, New Jersey, in our school district, there has 7 sending districts, and so in the communities of Manasquan, Spring Lake Heights.
So the
Del
sending
Mar.
districts of Manasquan lost 12 kids to suicide.
Well, Manasquan High School.
Wow.
Yeah, and those 7 towns send to that school.
They were
And
all
they're
they were Manasquan High School students?
Mm-hmm.
8 of them were Manasquan High School students, and 4 of them were graduates.
They
Is
were
that right?
graduates, yeah.
Wow. And it's for people that don't know, that listen, but it's a small community. It's a very tight knit, small community. Those sending towns you're talking about, there's 7 of them that send to Manasquan because they're such small towns.
Right.
So, and again, I went to Wall High School, kind of the rival to Manasquan, and what was going on in Manasquan, was people in Wall were very aware of it as well.
And if I can say before we go on to this topic, I have to say this very seriously. I never speak about this topic without true reverence for each one of those families that went through what they went through. And even for me, I knew every one of those children. So it's a very, very difficult topic for me to discuss, but also I want to say to anyone who's listening, that I know that every time I talk about this topic, someone has been affected by this topic, whether it's in their own families or themselves having suicidal ideation themselves or losing a friend or whatever. So I speak to this with true reverence and honor and respect for the families that have experienced this, because this is something that we have lessons we have learned from that period of time. And so I always say that, no one dies in vain if you can learn from the lesson and take that and to teach another person a better way or something to think about differently. So I just want to say that for our listeners, because I know that this is a tough topic and it's hit our community, and I'll still run into kids that will talk about it with such, it changed lives for us.
And when you say lesson, like you're not underselling it. Like what happened in Manasquan during that time period is actually in psychology textbooks and things these days. Is that right?
It's still one of the largest suicide contagions ever recorded in the country. And yes, there are books written about it. There are the crisis plan that we developed during that time, has become a model. We were writing the books on contagion. We still are. We're still learning.
And what kind of walk us through your experience with it, kind of when everything began, what your role was as, school nurse checking kids for asthma, and then how that changed, if at all.
Right.
Yeah, like you had the one passed away from the drugs. You had another, we have the train tracks here. Keep going with the story. Tell us like what happened and what this is all about.
Yeah, so then, a few months after the second loss, we had another loss. And so we really, and then we had another loss a few months after that.
Now you're hesitant to talk about how they killed themselves. Why is that? Tell us about that in terms of your career, mental health, and trying to prevent in the future.
I don't talk about method because I think it's traumatic and it can re-traumatize people. So it's not a healthy thing that I want to keep reliving method wise. But what I do want to talk about is that suicide is not always a desire to die. What suicide really is someone has an intense amount of psychological pain, really hard, and they cannot figure out a way to problem solve. And so suicide becomes an alternative because they get exhausted. They don't know how to problem solve, especially young adults. And so what I want to say to people is that it's not a desire to die. It's not a desire to end your biological existence. If they could end the pain, they would live. They would want to live. So that's something I want to talk about, because that is helpful and not traumatic. But oftentimes, the details of the losses can re-traumatize people. So I speak to it very cautiously, and recognizing that, I don't want to glamorize or glorify, because I don't want some child in the rafters who's in pain thinking, wow, you get a lot of attention if that happens to you, or I'll join a list of, really famous community members that took their lives. So I don't want that. And that's the lesson learned. That's one of the lessons learned that we take with us, that to be careful how we memorialize our students or our people who die by suicide, so that it doesn't become attractive. And that's contagion. That's what happens here, is that something about that time, literally, they call it a contagion, different than a cluster, because there was the similar method, all within a geographical area very close by, and there was a connection between the two. Sometimes you'll have a cluster and there's no connection. It's just coincidental that you had a large number in that period of time. But in a contagion, there's a connection. That's why they call it a contagion. It's almost like contagious.
So I understand what the COVID contagion was and the kind of the COVID virus, but what is the
mental health
or the
contagion?
string, the common thing through these that's connecting them, that's causing them? Like, why a contagion? Contagion suggests there's a connection or there's something similar that's causing them all.
Yeah,
like
and
a virus.
It's not the same it's not the same. It's different than a virus, like a physical virus.
Yeah.
It's not the same reasons. Every person that dies by suicide has separate, different reasons, and I call it like it's like an onion. Like, people will always ask me the why, and it's never one reason. Like for each child, there's an onion. There's layers and layers and layers of different reasons for that particular child.
Did any of these kids leave notes or text messages or say anything or to explain it, or like?
Actually, no, not too many.
Wow.
No, at least not to my knowledge. They may have in their family situations that the families have not shared. But I think what happened was...
Were they under drugs or alcohol at the time that lowered their inhibitions?
Some of them
was
were,
that a common theme?
It's interesting you should ask
Like they
that.
left a party late at night, the girlfriend or the person they're hooking up with wouldn't pick up the phone, and they just,
There was a lot
instead
of
of walking home, they walk in front of a train. Like,
there was that. One of the things during that period of time, we had the good fortune, I guess, that the federal government was actually looking at this and sent us funding to do psychological autopsies during that time, which means that, a very skilled professional who I was working with, a therapist, would go out to the families and really kind of ask the questions to try and get as much information as we could to try and understand what the connections were. And the result of that psychological autopsies did talk about drugs and alcohol, that in our community, we're at the beach. It's kind of been a norm for years and years. We're an area where people come to drink and party, and a lot of the parents are from that thinking and that old. And so there is, what they said in the report was that there is more alcohol and drugs in this area, the social norm, than other areas of the country.
so I think that's important. I think a lot of the reasons you're here and stuff is, look, this is an ugly topic. It's a difficult topic. It's in many ways a sickening topic if we tell some of the kids, like, and if you can talk about this, because this is important for kids around here. Like you said, in the area they call Spring Lake the Irish Riviera. Mm-hmm. This is the Jersey Shore. People come here, hey, Memorial Day weekend's coming up, Labor Day weekend's coming up. kids are out of school, kids are graduating school, and everything's great and they're happy. But can you talk about the lurking danger of all that? And what I tell my kids in this regard is, I say, look, you could be at a beautiful big mansion in Rumson, and if someone brings out a pill, okay, the danger of that is just as real there as it is in, some crack alley somewhere. It's the same drug, and don't let the glitz and the wealth fool you. The addictions and stuff can sneak up on you just as quickly as there as it can, like in the inner city in some crack den somewhere. So can you talk about that in terms of that? Because again, we're in something of a glitzy area in the Jersey Shore, and that's important for kids to know and understand.
Yeah, because addiction and suicide does not discriminate, and wealth and affluence do not protect you. We have protective factors and risk factors. But what I will say is that for all adolescents, the brain is underdeveloped. There's an amygdala of the brain that is underdeveloped. And so the part that makes a child have their emotions, decision-making, all of that is not at its highest level. And it's not fully developed. We used to think age 24, but now it's age 30, believe it or not. So we can't ask children to make decisions that we make as above 30. So we have to tell them that even more so you have to be careful, because you're having trouble making decisions without drugs and alcohol. You feed your brain drugs and alcohol, chances are you're going to have very poor decision making. Or inhibitions or difficulty making a decision to control a behavior. Not because you're a bad kid, because you are a kid and your brain just isn't able to process all of that. So yeah, drugs and alcohol are a serious risk factor that I think we all need to talk about. And, when we look at affluence, certainly our area, that was a thing. I'll never forget one of the fathers who spoke at his own son's eulogy said something that stopped me in my tracks, and I'll never forget it. And he said, that same damn train runs from Asbury Park all the way down the Jersey Shore. What is going on in our community that our kids are not coping because of their environmental and socioeconomic, struggles? And I think that's a question. And I've thought a lot about that. I actually want to write a book called "There Are No Dandelions in the Lawn," but there are dandelions inside the house. And oftentimes, people will get fooled by the outside look and assume that a child is okay because of that. And what I have learned in my experience, especially talking to kids during that period of time, that they're really struggling. And what kids are struggling with is that in our attempt to be beautiful, wonderful parents, we might do too much for our children. And we have stripped them of the ability to problem solve, because we swoop in and do a lot for them. That helicopter, and I call it snowplow parent, has not served them well. We really need to sit back and look at, from the time they're old enough to talk to them. I know you got a little one. How do you solve this problem? There's a kid on the swing right now. You want to get that swing. Let's talk about that. You got to wait. You got to, and what do you do? Or if you've got to, and teaching children, and I used to do this as a school nurse, that they're strong and that they have the capability to manage things. When a kid would come into my office and scrape his knee, right? And they'd be crying, and it was the worst thing in the world, and I have to clean it, right? I'd say, you're going to have to do some hard things right now, and this is going to hurt. And it, not that, I can kiss it and make it all better. This is going to hurt.
Yeah.
But at the end, we get a Sesame Street Band-Aid, and it's all going to be better. And at the end, look at you. Look at what you were able to do. You were able to endure even more pain than that boo-boo created for you. You're amazing. You're strong. You can do this. Not mommy's going to kiss it and make it all better, or, you know.
So I grew up the youngest of 13 kids, and
Wow.
we didn't have a lot of a ton of money growing
Yeah.
up or anything. And I remember when I would have problems, I didn't eat that good, frankly, growing up. And when I'd have problems, like I couldn't get somewhere, I couldn't get a ride, I didn't have money for something, I wanted, my mother, or I had some big problem. My mother would go on, or just get out of here, or just figure it out yourself. And I had a lot of that growing up. And so in a way, it's hard for me to understand. So when my kids have, my kids who have grown up with more things than I had growing up, when they have these problems, I roll my eyes. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, and I'll start yelling at them. I might curse and be like, do you understand what I'm saying, Mark?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Like when the Ukraine war started, we think we have problems here. How about a Russian missile flying across your town, and now you really got problems? Do you know what I'm saying? Like your dad was kind of.
Oh yeah, 100%. My dad was a police chief, and so kind of raised in that environment. It was the same thing. It was like rub some dirt on a kid, get back out there.
Exactly.
Suck
Like
it up.
if you're worrying about your meals and how you're going to get around, as opposed to how many, excuse my French, how many fucking likes you got on your post, okay, and why the person gave you like a thumbs down emoji, and you're going to get stressed out about that because, I'm sorry, this is the part where I'm supposed to learn that the guest has to talk, not me.
Yeah.
But it's this social media, I think, has so much to do with it. And when you talk about that cluster or the contagion starting in like 08 and 12-ish time period, social media wasn't as prevalent then as it is now, number one. But the text messaging on the cell phones, that's about when I think if you took a chart, if you took a chart of the growth of cell phones and social media and tracked it with teen suicide, my guess is it would go up on a chart like this. They would track each other. And I remember that time of 08 to 12 is when cell phones kind of moved from a flip phone to more of like, anyway.
Well, the anxious generation. Are you familiar with that book? I think it came out last year, which basically says exactly what you're talking about. The rise of social media and how much of, bullying and, cryptic bullying that can go on through that, and how kids are not doing what you're talking about, being like, get out there, problem solve for yourself, get exposed to the world, skin your knee, get better.
Because they're under a lot of different. So I want to say this. I totally agree with you guys. But there's a caveat. You're right. And so what happened with us, and I can say us, I was raised the way you were raised, right? The way you were raised. The pendulum swung the other way and said, well, my mother didn't meet my needs, and so we overcompensated.
I went to Villanova, and my son went to Villanova undergrad, and now on Facebook you have the groups, the Villanova Parents Group, these parents, and sometimes I can't help myself. These parents post on the Villanova Parents Group. My son or my daughter, was in the cafeteria today, and they didn't have skim milk. They only had 2%. Is there someone we can contact in the cafeteria department at Villanova to make sure? Like it's crazy to me. And then another parent posted a picture of the overflowing garbage in the dorm in Sheehan Hall at Villanova and said, "Can you believe this? I've contacted, this office about the." I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Excuse my French once again. I don't know what it is about my language skills today, but when I was at Villanova, I didn't talk to my parents for like 3 or 4 months. We had one phone in the hall, and we would use a paper clip to hack it so you didn't have to put the coins in to call home. And it's just like, there's no way that is good for the kids.
Right.
Like, there's no way. Like, if you raise a tiger cub in captivity, okay, raise it in captivity and then put it out in the wild, it's going to get eaten. It might not kill itself, but it sure as shit is going to starve to death. So I'm sorry I'm going off on this tangent, but
I think it's a really important tangent. What you're going off on, what you're talking about is resiliency.
Yeah.
The ability to bounce back from adversity, right? And so we as...
How about the ability to just experience adversity, much less bounce back from it?
Right.
Like my, I'm sorry, I'm going off again. I must feel strongly about this topic. So I remember my son, Jed, went to St. Catherine's School, which can be known to be a little harsh or whatever. And one of the teachers, he got in trouble for something, and I contacted the teacher and I said, thank you. I said, you make sure if he does it again, give him another detention, make it hard for the kid. My other daughter went to Trinity Hall, and she's like, it's so hard. And I'm like, great. I'm glad it's hard because it's preparing you for life because life's not easy.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
That's
Go
right.
ahead.
So I think your point, Jerry, is so well taken. And I say this to parents all the time. When I ask a parent what they want for their child, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, I just want them to be happy. But I say, no. There's more to parenting than that, right? You want to raise an independent child so that, God forbid, you get a diagnosis tomorrow. You can say to yourself and to your wife and even to your child, I have raised you well enough that I can leave this earth with the confidence that you're going to go on because you know the how to solve a problem, how to think through something. You're not just, and that happiness is not a chronic state of being. Right. It's in moments, right? It's in moments. So what you really want to raise, in my opinion, is an independent child, someone who can make decisions and be successful because of that independence. That's what we want in our children, but we mistake it for happiness. And so what really creates a happy child is one that feels good inside and relies on themselves, not their parent. What I have seen, like, say, that skim milk example, the mother that posted that should have said to the child, oh, you want skim milk and they only have 2% or whatever it is?
Go get a job and buy it.
Or no, even more so, go talk to the guy in charge of the kitchen. And find out why they don't, and ask them what, and figure it out. Solve your problem. Let's talk about what ways you could do it. And, oh, I can't talk to that person. Well, if you can't talk to that person, what can you do? Can you write an email? What can you, and if you can't, then let it go. Yeah. But I'm certainly not going to solve that problem for you.
I got to go on a little aside myself. That I got to do because,
Yeah.
So I said before, my dad
just don't curse, Mark. We're not
I won't
curse,
but I actually might incriminate myself. Sorry, I was a minor. So kind of to your point, as you're sitting there, I'm thinking about when I was in high school, I went to a party. The second I walked into the party, the police come raiding in. They're like, freeze everyone. It was a huge, I guess, Monmouth University. They were cracking down on underage kids drinking and stuff. So I get to this party and they immediately, kind of kick everyone out, bring people to the police station. And myself and 5 other students, I think it was, all got written up for it. And we were all in National Honor Society. And we all got kicked out of National Honor Society. My dad had to come and pick me up from this thing. And he's like, you have ruined our family's name. Like, I'm driving you out to your grandpa's in February to weed his lawn. You apologize to him. You have his last name. You've ruined it. He made me dig a ditch for a swimming pool in February and was like, if you don't get your act together, you'll be doing this for the rest of your life, just digging ditches and all that. And he goes, he's a police captain at the time. He goes, I'm not doing a damn thing to help you with this situation. You got yourself into this mess. You deal with it. So I had to do a request for the police report. We all got kicked out of National Honor Society. I requested the bylaws from National Honor Society. I wrote this, basically my first ever legal brief that advocated how there was no administrative hearing. We were denied due process. We were never formally kicked out because there was no hearing and there was no proof that any of us were drinking at this party. It's no different that if the police came to our house and there was a bottle of wine open on the counter that, we could all then get charged with this thing. So people had hired lawyers, people had gone to the hospital to get blood work and all that. Nothing. I wrote this memo. The assistant principal brings me in. He's like, Mark, we looked at this. You're absolutely right. We're going to take it under review. And then every single one of us got put back into National Honor Society. And the biggest thing for me, when we're talking about all this, is my dad could have been, hey, look, I'm a captain over at Wall PD. Can you make this go away?
Sure.
Could have called, didn't do any of that. And it was one of the most valuable lessons I feel like I learned. And frankly, I think it kind of started to set me on a career of being I might want to be an attorney. So.
You can advocate for yourself. And what that creates in kids is a sense of self-esteem and positive self, because you can tell your child all you want that they're amazing, they're special, but if that's extrinsic, that's outside noise. But what are they saying to themselves on the inside? And when you did something like that, that built you say, hey, look at me. Like I like what that felt like. We have learned in mental health, and I think this is a really important thing, that giving back to others, giving back to your church, giving back to your community builds resiliency. And I'll give you an example about that, just looping back around to the contagion. When we began to climb out of that, I'll never forget the day. It was after the fifth, let's see now, probably the fourth loss, and I was out of words. And I went to every single classroom because that was my role, to follow the empty desk. And
What does that mean? Follow the empty desk.
You said follow the empty desk?
yeah,
Oh, that's such a tragic way to put it. So that student now is no longer
Right,
there.
right.
So
But what does it mean
yeah.
to follow it? What does that
that
mean?
means that for that day, that the first day back to school, when
You go to each class. Where
I
they
would
were.
go to each class
Got
and
it.
just say, "Are you okay?" and let's talk about it. And,
Got it.
You know, and so I was in those classrooms, and I remember saying, "I have no more words for you. I want to hear what you have to say to me. I want to hear what you need. You start talking to me. I need to help you. I need your help." And that day, kids stood up and said, we need a place to go. We need a place to go where there's not drugs and alcohol on the weekends. We need to be able to do something besides drink and drug on the weekends. And so we started brainstorming, and they were like, there's nowhere to go in town. So we went to the mayor and council. The kids, they decided this. The mayor and council sold the rec center to the kids for $1. And we spent the entire summer with contractors donating, rebuilding this old dilapidated rec center. And these highest risk kids that were struggling so much because they were so deep in grief from so many losses of their dear friends showed up every darn day to lay the carpet, to paint the wall, to whatever needed to be done. And they did that. And at the end of each day, they would thank me because they were feeling good about themselves. That moved then to a Habitat for Humanity project that also taught lessons to kids. I said, listen, this is actually a funny story. I said they said, we want to do more. We're embarrassed. They said, Manasquan used to be high school, used to be such a place of pride. Now kids from Wall are saying, calling it marijuana high or whatever. And so we want to do something to show that who we really are. So we did some brainstorming again. And they said, I said, you want to give back to the community? I said, well, how about Habitat for Humanity? Well, you try and find a dilapidated house in the Spring Lake area. We did find, I went to the police chief. He helped me find one. And he said, we have to ask her permission to redo her house. It ended up that she herself had mental health issues. And I said, don't worry about it. I'm a community mental health nurse. I'll go to the front door. I'll get her to talk to me. And I went to the front door, knocked on the door, and she slammed the door in my face. And he goes, I'll get her to talk to me. She knows me because I'm the police chief, right? And so he did. And I said to her, I remember saying, I need your help. And the door opened a little wider. And we ended up saying, this is what we want to do. We want to do a brush with kindness. It's just the outside, and we'd like to take over your house. She had lost many family members in a row and had succumbed to depression herself. And so she was very paranoid. And so she said we could, but we had to stay on the outside and not to take her picture and all these other things. So we did that. I had to tell the kids, I said, we got a house. So we started this project, and we were there every day. It was so dirty, you can't imagine. The whole thing, we cleaned it, painted it, put a new, they were putting new roof. I mean, it was crazy what the kids were able to do. And every day at the end of the day, when I would drop off the kids, they would thank me. I haven't felt this good in a really long time.
And they're working.
They're working. They were giving back to this woman. By the end of the time that we spent at her house, she came out of her house was gardening next to the kids, smiling, and actually did take a picture. We never posted it because she asked us not to. But that they taught me a lesson there that that's what they need. Those kinds of things were part of their recovery because we can't do everything for everybody to make them feel better. Grief is work, and they were working through their grief by giving back. And so that's resiliency. But I will say this about our children today, and your children particularly, the pressures that you and I went through as kids, and even you, because you just missed, they're different now. And that there is no way we can say to a child anymore, I know what you're going through. We absolutely do not know. And I learned that lesson so many times. I was the anti-bullying specialist at Manasquan High School. I'll never forget the day the law came in, and I'll be honest with you, I was like, oh, for God's sakes.
Another
we're gonna
mandate.
Like now we got to investigate everything. We need this like a hole in the head. But I knew that bullying was going on, but I just thought, well, let's see how this goes. So I became the anti-bullying specialist, and this one girl came in, and she was telling me how she was being made fun of because she wore yellow pants into the study hall, and someone called her fat. And I said, well, tell me about the bully. And she, he's a jerk. I'm like, well, then why are you letting this really get to you? And she goes, oh, it's not him. It's this. And she turned over the phone. There were 1,500 likes. And there's only 1,000 kids in Manasquan High School.
Wait, someone took a picture?
Someone took a picture, a post and a picture, and there were 1,500 likes. And she was humiliated for a girl at 15 to have 1,500 people, 1,000 kids in the school. She goes, I can't come back to school. I'm humiliated. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, you can't come back to school. You are humiliated. My goodness. That would never have happened in my day. It would have been the jerk that called you fat. You would have dismissed him. Your friends would have supported you, and it would have been over.
What year is this roughly?
This was probably 2010.
It was probably Facebook at that point. Facebook likes.
Yeah.
They're not on Facebook anymore.
Yeah, they're not on that now.
You're not. I really did just miss that. Like Facebook became a thing. I think the tail end of my senior year of high school. But again, we won't keep going on our own asides. Like that went on. I said to her, "You're right. I'm going to find out who's liking this, and I'm going to call them down." And as much as I could investigate, I did. I interviewed 22 kids. Those kids were the top of the class, the scholars, and when they came in, they were like, they never get in trouble kind of kids. And I said, I want you to know that you like this, and this is the result of that. And how would you feel if I called your parent and told them that? They were very, very shook up. And none of them really did understand what that click did. They weren't bad kids. They just didn't understand.
It's funny. When we talked earlier, you're like, well, geez, it was really going to go more than an hour? I feel like the podcast, you're like, oh, geez, I don't know, 2-3 hours might be a lot. But there's so much to talk about here. There's 100%. There's so many angles and layers to this. Let me ask you, do you think there's like an anthropological element to all this? Meaning, so I guess we kind of down this rabbit hole in the past, like we kind of swam out of the ocean with our tails, and then we evolved, and you have those things, and then we were Neanderthal man, and then, so in the course of evolution, humans had to hack the forest, hunt, survive. And what are you doing all that time? You're working, okay? And we're evolving to this. You're working to a goal. You're cooking. You're building something. You're creating fire. You're inventing the wheel. 50% of the people aren't going to make it past their first year. If you lived past 30 years old in the Middle Ages, you were an old man at 30. And so we evolved to this working and needing towards a goal and having little leisure time. And then you have the old saying, like, the devil finds work for idle hands, right? That's a line in a song about birth, school, work, death. It's a song. It's kind of a hard rock song, and it just continues on with birth, school,
I see you as a hard
work,
rock guy.
death. What's that?
I
You don't see me as
a
that
hard rock guy.
Yeah. Well, you're the one that said there's no dandelions on the front lawn. So birth, school, work, death, right? And so that's how humans are hardwired to work, to have a thing, to have a goal, to have some leisure time. If suddenly, NAFTA's passed, and when I grew up, if I got a new wiffle ball and bat, it was like, wow. And then suddenly with free trade and stuff being made in China, well, now the wiffle ball bats, they're a dime a dozen, and kids have everything and they're not working. Is there sort of that kind of element to it? I mean, it seems to me, and I go back to Mark's thing about his dad and my thing with my mom, suck it up, or the immigrants, pull yourself up with your bootstraps, personal responsibility. And then when you go into this world where everything is at your fingertips and everything is, is there some sort of a hardwired element to that? Or are there any studies about that? Anything?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in terms of studies about the brain right now and how really, certainly, what brings, resilience to us, but also how the rapid fire that the kids are under right now with the cell phones and all the social media is actually affecting the brain. The blue light even is affecting sleep, which sleep is a huge factor in how kids are coping and struggling. And you talk about the anxious generation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work saying that, these kids, things are coming easy, they're coming fast, but they're not getting the satisfaction that we got when we worked for things. And yes, they have a lot, and things seem to be coming easy, but in fact, that's not what they're looking for. That's not what brings them to a higher state of mental health. And that's where I think we're making our mistakes.
I think because we're hardwired for the opposite. Like I'm saying, you might call me crazy and say Jerry's getting off on a tangent with coming out of the sea with their tails and evolving into it. But we're hardwired to work and to have to fight. And that doesn't mean conflict necessarily, but anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that. And I think that kids, especially this generation, they're under a lot of pressure, different pressure than we were under. I mean, the academic pressure is really, really strong right now. The athletic pressure is really, really strong. Like we never had, all the competition in sports and academics. We just went out and played and had fun. Well, I'm a woman, so I didn't have too much of that, but because back then they didn't.
What I just so my kids played baseball growing up, and it was like, oh, you got baseball, like you just said.
Mm-hmm.
In the spring, we played baseball. In the summer, we went to the beach. In the fall, I played soccer. In the winter, I played basketball, and that was it. Now it's like, oh, baseball? Oh, well, you got to do winter training. You got to do this.
Traveling teams.
The travel teams upon travel teams. And then all these kids that we coached in grammar school and a little bit in high school, all these kids their elbows have had surgeries.
Yep.
And then I see these kids in basketball, a college player just plants his foot and tears his knee. No one tore their knee from planting their foot, but the problem is it's the repetitive stress injury 12 months out of a year. Oh, you got to specialize. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that in sports. You're seeing it in academics.
We're seeing it everywhere. This extraordinary pressure on kids, and yet, we're not providing them with the tools to even speak out and say, like, okay, can I just choose one sport? Do I have to do them all, or can I just choose to excel in one area? But the pressure on them is extraordinary, and that's what kids will say. And the other thing that kids are telling us, and this is an interesting thing. We're trying to get kids to talk to adults, right? Because we know that, as I told you earlier, that brain is underdeveloped. So if they can partner with a trusted adult, one caring adult in a child's life can make a difference, right? But what they're telling us is, the kids are telling us, that the parents aren't listening. They're talking, they're giving advice, they're judging, but they're not listening. And so what kids are telling us is that we wish that we would be listened more to. And I think that's something that we all have to pay attention to. You know, are we really listening? And some of our kids are telling us they don't want to play sports. And we're telling them, you gotta. You know, if you're going to get to that college scholarship, you gotta. And you gotta travel, because if you fall behind, you know, and boom, 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 and you know, you gotta get an A, because if you're gonna go to, you know, Georgetown, which is, you know, my alma mater, you're gonna go. Not my alma mater, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the parent,
You know, that kind of thing. So, you know, understanding that subtly we are putting pressure on our kids because we're under pressure amongst our own peers. And I'm going to say that out loud. Parents are under pressure to have kids that achieve, to have successful kids, to have smart kids. We're comparing our children to other kids and other parents. And that's that race that we need to really look at. Because some of our kids, you know, will be great plumbers, will be great electricians, will not always be the ones that go, we're losing our trades.
So this seems like a big picture almost, because really what a lot of this is coming back to is Mark and I, it seems like we're asking you, well, what caused this contagion? What is this all from? And it seems like a long-winded way of us all collectively answering the question and kind of throwing these different elements to it. But what about, what is it called? Harry Carey? What is that? What is that all about? Because that seems like that's not caused by cell phones.
So tell me what you're thinking.
We're talking about the ancient samurais, that if someone said something wrong
or
no, I think it's called Harry Carey. Exactly that.
I was thinking it was Charles Manson or something like that.
So
That's
yeah, you
Helter
have to
Skelter.
explain to me what you're
Well,
what you're
the
saying.
ancient samurais, like for honor, they had to disembowel themselves.
Oh yeah.
Like that seems like a completely different. Is there any studies about that
That's
or
a
what
big
that's all
cultural
about?
thing.
That is a
too, right?
cultural.
Like Japan.
That's cultural.
Because what I want to get, what I'm also asking about is, in third world countries, does Haiti have suicide contagions? Do you know these, or is this more of a first world thing? There's different types of this, I guess.
If some countries do, I'm looking. I think Guyana is the highest suicide rate. We come in around fourth. We are the United States. of
Ghana?
America.
Did you say Ghana?
Yeah. The United States is the fourth highest
But wait,
rate.
Ghana, that's where the Jonestown massacre was.
Am I saying it right?
Wait, Ghana is in Africa.
Guyana.
Is that South America?
Guyana. Where is that?
Guyana.
That's the one in South America.
You're at hey, pulled up, Oscar.
Look up where Jonestown happened. It was in South America. I think it was in Guyana or Guyana. Anyway.
Guyana. I don't know, but that they have high suicide rates. We come in around fourth. But the United States, for having the affluence and all the wealth that we do, why are we at this rate? Do you know that suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst our youth? Second leading cause of death.
Car crash is the first?
Car crashes are
That's
the
terrible.
first.
Oh, my gosh.
10 to 14-year-olds. Second leading cause of death. Third leading cause between 10 and 24-year-olds. So when I hear that, that propels my work because suicide is preventable. So as a nurse, for all the diseases in the world that are not preventable.
How does a 5 or 10-year-old, what does the analysis tell you about that for 5 and 10-year-olds?
Is there abuse? Is there are there any kind
There's
of common
lots
underlying?
of things.
How are they even
sure.
learning about that concept? Or
Yeah, and it's earlier and earlier. But, you have to think about what children, so a lot of kids are in difficult situations. There, there's a lot of situations. And one of the things that we used to say about suicide is that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. That's a very old school way of talking about it, and I don't talk about it that way because that minimizes what a child is going through. Because if a child is experiencing domestic abuse or addiction from with living with a parent with alcoholism or any of those things, or sexual abuse, you can't say that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. There's nothing temporary about that problem. And so for a child who is in a situation that they can't get out of because they're a child, and they're looking at a situation that they're really trapped in, they feel. And that's why that they may decide that life isn't worth living. That's why that trusted adult becomes, even if it's outside of the family, if it's a coach, if it's a teacher, if it's a Sunday school teacher, that someone can talk to, that becomes a lifeline for that child. So that's why I say to people, please think about when a child comes up to you, any kid at any point in time, I don't care if they're 5 and says, I can't do this anymore, that we pause and say, hey, buddy, what can't you do anymore? What's going on? That we ask the question, are you okay? And what's going on? And have things gotten so bad that it's really hard for you to wake up in the morning, or maybe even that you've gotten as far as you don't want to live in it. To be able to have that brave conversation with our children will open a door and save a life, because what you're saying to them is no judgment here, my friend, no judgment. We all struggle. You have a safe space. If you're at a place that you can't problem solve your way through, you can talk to dad. You can talk to Uncle so-and-so. You can talk to me as your coach or a friend. That is what I believe. There is stigma and shame around our mental health. Not our physical health, which I laugh all the time because, I'll be in the shop, right, trying to buy eggs. People know I'm a nurse, and next thing I know, they're telling me about their colonoscopy they're going for, the mucus, the headaches. They'll talk about anything. But if I say to you, so how's your son doing, or how's your daughter doing? Because I know they've struggled. Oh, they're doing well. They're doing fine. And the conversation ends. We can talk about our physical health in ways that we probably, we wonder we're so open. But why are we not talking about our mental health? And that, to me, is part of what the problem is.
So it's important to just to also have that personal interaction. If you think someone's having an issue, to actually put the phone down, talk to them in person instead of saying yeah, and going back to social media.
So
as an
important.
adult meaning.
So important. Not just for kids, but for all of us, because our friends are struggling to our age. But certainly for children, to be able to open that door and say, whatever you got to tell me, no judgment. And here's the thing. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm just going to listen.
Yeah.
And if you want my advice, ask me.
Yeah.
Because we launch into advice. We launch into telling the stories when we were a kid, right?
We turn into talking about ourselves. Oh, well, when I...
Yep,
I had the same thing happen to me. And then they start talking about themselves instead of listening.
It's tough not to do that. I feel like especially in our profession, it's so much just solving problems that when someone starts talking to you about a problem, I start thinking through, well, what about this? What if you try this? But yeah, I've heard that before. Like, do you want the question, like, do you want me to listen to you, or do you want me to try and help you?
Right. Or like, and so when we say words like we or us, or let's put our heads together, or I'm so glad you shared that with me, now that you told me maybe we can work on it together, we, us, those are adjoining words. So when you think about suicide, there are two components that I need you to understand, the world to understand. There's a loss of hope, and there's a sense of isolation. And so when you say we, us, let's put our heads together, immediately you lent somebody your hope, and you took them out of that moment of being alone because you said, we're going to work together. It's that simple. And why I say to people in the moments, because suicide ideation comes and goes. So there are moments. You can save people in moments. And if we begin to offer hope in those moments, people will know they can come back and talk to us again. And I think that is that stigma and shame of, I can't tell anyone that I really feel crummy today. And I'm thinking I didn't sleep. Maybe I'm depressed. No, I'm not going to tell anybody that. Or I feel anxious. I don't even want to go out on that baseball field today. I don't feel good. We're not allowing kids to tell us those things because they've got all these pressures. So I think that's a conversation in the United States of America. This is across the country that we can all do better at.
when I started this law firm, like in 2010, it was probably one of the most difficult. It was one of the most difficult professional parts of my career, starting this law firm. And it was funny because I would so one day everything's going great. Like everything's good, everything's lined up, we're on track here. And then the next day I'd be like, oh, this is just terrible. Everything sucks. This isn't going to work. Now, nothing changed from the day everything was great to the day everything was no longer good, except one thing. Can you guess, as a suicide or mental health professional, what was different on the 2 days? I know Mark probably knows the answer. If you don't get it, we're going to get Mark's
I
good.
would say you didn't sleep.
All right, write it
You
down.
didn't sleep the night before, and it's your thoughts. It's what you're bringing into the conversation. It's your own negative thinking.
What do you think the answer is, Oscar? What changed in the 2 days? Yeah. One day everything's great. The next day everything's terrible. It's not going to work. And everything's the same except one thing. All right, Mark, what'd you write down?
Weather.
Exactly.
Oh,
100%.
I hear that.
100%.
I so hear that.
So talk about that a little bit. I always heard that the state of Washington has the highest suicide rate and also has the most rainy days per year in a country.
Seasonal affective disorder
Yeah.
is what SAD we call it.
Which is so real, by the way. Like,
so real.
Even if it's cold outside, if the sun is out, life's great. If it's not, ugh.
and that's starting to get, but
You need to get out of Jersey.
he does. He does.
I lived in Colorado for 10 years. I went to college in Colorado, and it's sunny there, 340 some odd days a year, Loved it. The weather was so easy to be in. And then and part of why I went to Colorado was because of the weather. I was that kid. It was a rainy day when I decided I'm going to Colorado. I visited it and I knew it was sunny, and I lived out there, went to college out there, and I had a great time. I'm a big skier. But the weather is everything to so many people. So there is an enormous amount of research on this seasonal affective disorder. I mean, they put people under lights just to, improve the mood. So yeah, that is a big thing.
It's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
I'm kind of the exact same way, but I forget it. Like when it'll be like a rainy I'm like, man, I just don't have it today. I don't know what's wrong, blah, blah, blah. And then it's 65 and sunny the next day. And I'm like, woo, like
It's
wild.
really true. I mean, yet we do live. I've always found Jersey hard to live in with the weather. When we go into those gray spells of rain and dreariness
January,
for days on
February,
end.
early
Yeah,
March.
that's why I like to ski, because it gets me outside.
Yeah.
I will say that real quick, and I think we need to take a break. Like I read a study kind of recently. I sound like cool saying that, but I just read a book, and the study was in it, where they asked people to estimate the percentage of time they think people in California are happy, because it's nice weather and everything. Everyone's like, oh, 80%. They say these high numbers. It's just the same as anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like so the weather is a thing, but it's just the same. You get used to it no matter where you are.
Yeah.
So I told you that we could edit, if we say something dumb, we can edit the video. So if you want on the question, we can edit out and just have you say weather in response to the question, if that's something we want to edit.
Okay, we got fun with that.
All right, let's take a break.